Mute to avoid any feedback, please. Any remote participants, could you keep your camera off and microphone off unless you wish to speak, and ideally not use the camera facility at all, as this can affect the quality of the meeting. We do actually seem to have some sound issues with people who are on remotely, but we will try to work through that the best we can. Please advise that the meeting, sorry, this is the trouble with reading things out. This meeting will be recorded, and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. Members assessing the meeting remotely should use their Swale Borough Council or KCC laptop to participate virtually. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile or tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as in remote attendance unless you make yourself physically known. Well, welcome to the meeting, the first one for 2023. I'd like to advise the following members are in attendance in the Council chamber or remotely: the Director of Regeneration and Neighbourhoods, Emma Wiggins; the Community Safety Manager, Steph Curtis; the Head of Environment and Leisure, Martin Cassell, who's online, sorry; Graham Tuff, Green Space Manager and Democratic Services. Behind me is Kelly McKenzie, and she's been assisted online by, I forgot Joe Millard, sorry about that. There's no fire drills planned for this evening, so I'm looking round. I think we're all quite familiar with the fire procedures here. There's no visitors, so I will skip the formal bit just to remind you, don't use the lifts on the way out, and choose the nearest exit to evacuate the building. And we won't re-enter the building until we are told it's safe to do so by the officer in charge. Okay. Are there any absences and confirmation of substitutes?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Cameron Baird, who is attending online. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Beard is online, I've seen, but there is no substitute advised for him, yeah? Can I ask if anyone has any declarations of interest on anything on the agenda tonight? You should have all seen a copy of the minutes by now. So I'd like to ask if everyone's quite happy to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of November, minute numbers 408 to 414 as a correct record and reflection of that evening. Sorry about that. I'm not sure. Sorry about that. Being prudent, I've just turned my... Is it something in here or? Okay, just to check. Is everyone quite happy that the minutes are signed as a correct recollection of that evening? Minutes numbers 408 to 414. Thank you. So if I can move on now to item 5, the Community Safety Strategic Assessment. All the papers there in front of you. The officer, Steph Curtis, will introduce the report, but just before that, we have two representatives, Councillor Hall and Councillor Davey. Councillor Davey would just like to give a short update on the Community Safety Partnership from his perspective. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. There's not much to say, but there's just one point that maybe members are already aware of. The Chief Inspector, Sarah Ribbett, mentioned. She said at present there is a reduction of PCSO levels due to resignations and some joining up to become police officers. There is no current plan for recruitment. In December, she said that there was 15 new officers due to start with a further cohort this month. As I say, many of you might be aware of this, but I just think that's really bad news that certainly affect a lot of people in the community.
Okay, thank you for that quick update. If I can ask Steph Curtis to introduce the report. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So, oh no, we're going to get my feedback too, aren't we? So is it any better if I don't sit right on top of it? It's maybe a bit better. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So this paper discusses the strategic assessment that informs the Swale Community Safety Priority Setting, and the purpose of the paper today is to gather some feedback from yourselves on the feedback of the CSP performance, as well as any emerging issues you feel we should be needing to focus on. Swale Borough Council is a statutory partner of the Community Safety Partnership, and annually we are required to complete this strategic assessment. The purpose of it is to ensure that we have a good understanding of the community safety problems in the borough. It includes a review of current performance against priorities, discussion about emerging issues, and consideration of wider threats and opportunities that may impact the work of the partnership. The Community Safety Partnership Executive Group will meet towards the end of January to discuss the strategic assessment. They'll look at what the sort of data has said, as well as what feedback from partners have said, and any feedback from yourselves tonight as well. One point to make is that the overall priorities, which are shown in Appendix 1 of the document, haven't actually changed in themselves for a good couple of years. It's more the specific focus within them that have been amended. The other element that I wanted to emphasise is that this committee does have a scrutiny function of the Community Safety Partnership, and again, that's sort of another reason for us bringing sort of this discussion forward tonight. We've also circulated as Appendix 2 a performance report that does go to the Community Safety Partnership quarterly, that discusses sort of key statistics as well as updates on our current sort of actions within our community safety plan. The last meeting of the group was November, so it is sort of a couple of months out of date now. The strategic assessment itself is currently being drafted. We're quite reliant on sort of data being shared from other partners, and there has been a little bit of delay of some of that, but that's why the sort of physical strategic assessment hasn't been shared with you tonight, because it is still being drafted. But sort of the proposal, I suppose, as part of this paper is that the Communities Committee provides feedback to the Community Safety Partnership to inform its strategic assessment and priority setting process based upon the following questions. So from reviewing the current performance of the CSP against its identified priorities, do you feel the partnership is serving its communities effectively? And are there any other community-based issues you feel the CSP should consider focusing on in 23-24? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll open the floor up for people to raise their points or debate on the issues. Councillor MacDonald.
Good evening, everyone. Obviously I look at the council tax bill, and I find that we pay far more in police rate than we do to Swale. As we employ a huge number of people in Swale, and I don't decry that at all, I'm sad to see that the PCSOs are being reduced, but if they're replacing them with officers, then let's, for goodness sake, see the officers turning up to these trouble spots more than they do at the present time. So we do pay a very enhanced rate to the police authorities. So I think we want to look at, personally, I would want to look at value for money for that. Thank you.
Okay, it's a good point, well made, but obviously the police budget is set by the Police and Crime Commissioner, so that's sort of out of our control, and we probably pick up the pieces when it all goes away with the lack of attendance to certain incidents that are reported to us.
As Councillor Hall mentioned earlier, the police obviously are looking at resources, and they're currently consulting internally on their neighbourhood policing review. I think I did circulate sort of some information in terms of what we've been made aware of so far. So I think the new model is due to come in June. So I'm hoping we'll get a bit more detail of exactly what that looks like at a district level soon, and we can share that. But it will be, from a partnership perspective, we'll be looking at what that looks like and what impact it has.
you, Chair. I agree with about the PCSOs that it's not a good state of affairs to be in a position where we are potentially losing such a resource on one hand, but also on the other hand should be benefiting, but as you say, by the increase of actual police officers whose powers are far more wide-ranging to actually do something. And with respect to the PCSOs, they become, I think, to a point where they're so far stretched over the last few years that a lot of people say, I wouldn't have a clue who they are, I would never see them. If for that to be really effective, you need people like PCSOs, you need numbers and you need them in the area. But the couple of points I was going to raise in terms of the actual report, on page 12 or 2 of 10, which I want to look at, the antisocial behaviour. Interesting that glad that the amount of antisocial behaviours has dropped. But I wonder how 21-22 would compare, and if you got the figures around from 1920, because I'm surprised, a little bit surprised that September 20 to August 21 was during the height of the pandemic, when we should have been locked down, not going anywhere, and yet we've got a 3,800 amount of antisocial behaviour. Now, whether that's partly due to the fact that because of the lockdown, people become sort of, to a degree, stir crazy within the four wall syndrome and went out and did something. But I would be interested to see how that does compare to the previous year, and whether the 21-22 figure is actually a reduction or has gone back to what it may have been pre-pandemic. In terms of going forward, one area which I think I would like to see some action or something done about, and I think this probably affects, I'm going to guess, all wards, certainly the town centres, is the illegal use of electronic scooters down paths, on the roads, the speed which they get up to. And I was in a meeting, it might have been at the area committee sometime, where there was talk about potentially making it of legalising them, and that fills me with dread. We see these machines, unlicensed, people not wearing helmets, riding around at speeds of, I mean, some of these bikes, 30 mile an hour is a doddle. I've known of them to get up 80, 90 mile an hour, and that would scare the living bejesus out of me at that speed, frankly. But also no lights, and I would hope there was something happening with that.
There, because I'm not disagreeing with what you say, but I think with that's legislation which is really down to central government, and I know the Police and Crime Commission isn't in favour of e-scooters. Yes. I mean, I've been on record as saying some irresponsible use of e-scooters is dangerous, but then so is the irresponsible use of a motor vehicle, a motorbike, a push bike. Used sensibly, they could be a benefit, but unfortunately, it doesn't always happen like that. But I think that's mainly an issue really for central government.
But I think there's an element that we could actually lobby, help. We can express our opinion on that and potentially do what we can and lobby it.
And I'm sure the officer will take it back and make sure that the Police and Crime Commissioner knows as well our two representatives.
So certainly, again, from the police's perspective, I know they've said before, Councillor Dender and I have had a number of conversations about these, haven't we, is that, you know, their hands are tied to an extent. They are willing to do some targeted operations to more educate and then look at enforcement if possible. I think the lobbying angle might be something more productive that we can try and do. Going back to the earlier question about ASB reporting, the interesting thing during the pandemic is that any breaches of lockdown regulations and rules were logged as ASB. So that particular year, we saw a large increase, which is why, you know, we're obviously looking at, you know, there's quite a large decrease this year. So as part of the actual strategic assessment process, we're trying to unpick maybe what that looks like. But yeah, certainly that is why they look like there was a very large increase. It's because of all the breaches.
Sorry, Councillor Davey was next, but can I just come in quickly because Becca was stepped on. Yeah, it was really just a jump to.
Well, that's all right. I'll put you down to speak after Councillor Rolls. Councillor Davey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't believe Sarah Revett's with us anymore. She's moved on now, correct? I did get a PowerPoint come through, which was, I think, part of the neighbourhood policing review, but not specific to Swale. It was much more generic. And I think the PCSOs were down to just over 200 from around 300, over 300. So 15 new officers starting with a huge reduction in PCSO is not going to be very beneficial to us all. I concur with previous speakers. The presence needs to be looked at, and it's all well and good. Again, this obviously goes back to the Police and Crime Commissioner engaging new officers. Although I saw an article saying that many are actually resigning within months of starting, and yet we saw a post about frontline staff being seconded to go and answer phones because the phone system was overloaded. We obviously haven't replaced the 23,000 backroom staff that we've lost over the last 12 years or so, which is key, I believe, in having people out on the street. Now, bizarrely enough, on my way in tonight, I passed 3 PCSOs in the home base, and how many at the station? 6 more police. I don't know what was going on, but so there was a visible presence tonight. So it's kind of making me a bit hypocritical. But I do regularly shop in the high street, and there are concerns about repeat offenders. I've even been given the name of one in every single day, and I saw a report in the Medway. I believe it was a shop just shutting because they could get no response, and a shopkeeper in Sittingbourne High Street having to police the door the whole of an afternoon rather than serve customers. We shouldn't be in that situation. We should have a visible presence in the high street. I remember we used to have a Bobby on the beat, even only a few years ago, who would put his head in the various pubs I was working at, and you got to know him and he got to know the villains. But we don't see that now. With the PCSOs, bless them, they work flat out, but they're pulled, as Councillor Bowen said, from pillar to post. I think I've lost the one I had in Milton. I haven't seen him for a while. Can't get response on an email. They get just pulled as far as Dartford, I believe they were pulled once, and that's not what we need. We need a proper visible presence. And I know this isn't the forum for it here. And the question was, does the CSP do a good job? Well, it does. Unfortunately, part of the CSP is us holding the police to account at the next meeting, which is on the 26th. Councillor Hall and I will be there. Hopefully, we'll have a representative there that we can speak to, and we can have a new inspector that is a permanent one. We've had about 3 or 4 in the last couple of years. So there's no way of, as I've said before, there's no way for the town centre, the urban area, to engage with the police outside of emailing them. They won't come to the area committees, and we're not on calc. So how do we feed information into them? And it should be a two-way conversation. It shouldn't just be us going, we want this, can you do this? The police should be coming to us as well as saying, can we get you to do this? Can we ask you to do things as well? Yeah, thank you, Chair.
I was just going to kind of clarify at this point, I suppose. So we do have a new district commander who started the week before Christmas, and also a new CSU inspector, both of whom have indicated they will be here for the foreseeable in terms of policing lengths. So, we've got some good strategic links now that I think have been missing. And I think sort of the week back from Christmas, the Sittingbourne Town Centre was highlighted as an area of concern. So that probably is part of why we've seen some extra resource. But I think certainly at our next meeting, flagging our concerns about the high street is probably sort of one of those strategic problems that we do need to look at more.
Okay, the next is Councillor Hampshire, followed by Councillor Perkin, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Rolls, Councillor Dendor, Councillor Goode. If I've missed anyone, please let us know. Councillor Eakin. So, Councillor Hampshire.
Thank you, Chairman, and Happy New Year to you. Just picking up some of the things that have come up this evening, in terms of the electric scooters, it is an enforcement matter, but it requires legislation. The legislation is there, but the police have like a workload like that. Where do you prioritise the resources? But I will say some of the retailers, they do make it very clear to the buyers that you shouldn't actually be using them on the highway or public pavements. So I think there needs to be a bit of an education kind of outreach perhaps performed. And I know the council has the Swale Youth Forum, and that is a great forum, but that is very limited because it's only 1 or 2 representatives from each of the schools across the borough. If there could be greater outreach actually into the schools, either from the police directly or from the CSP kind of representatives, because it's a multi-agency body, having, you know, been involved in it in a former life some years ago. I think that would be a good thing. And actually, in terms of the priorities that you have, I think we need to look as a council at how we can do that outreach again. We used to do an awful lot when I was the Deputy Cabinet Member for Safer Families and Communities. We used to go out into various wards across the borough and do action days of litter picking, you know, Christmas free meals. We used to do so much. And I don't know how much of that has been happening since the new administration took over. But obviously it would have been impeded for a couple of years because of COVID, and understandably so. But I think it would be nice to get a greater programme or a clearer programme of that. And that's not to say that there hasn't been some of that, but I think it's not maybe as much as it was. And it would be really nice to see something like the Swale Fusion Festival go again, not just because of what it does, but also the added benefits that it brings. It actually helps revitalise our high streets, particularly when it was in Sittingbourne. And it's been such a shame not to see that have been continued post-COVID. And again, I know COVID has got in the way, but we're in a post-COVID world now. We can kind to an extent, we can kind of do things that we've not been able to do. And I think what perhaps is lacking in the report is that real big vision of actually how we can get that outreach going again. But I think the priorities, by and large, are right. But I think the delivery could be bigger.
I can certainly feedback an element on the delivery, I suppose. And I think the bottom line really is resourcing, not just from us as a council, but partner agencies. And I think as we've come out of COVID, actually, the partnership resources have been spread more thinly, so the capability and the, you know, to deliver a lot of that. And that's, I think, where the Fusion Festival as well was kind of come unstuck. It is that resourcing. And I think with our increasing resourcing pressures, you know, I don't know quite what to suggest on that front, but we can certainly feed back that outward facing work is something that you're keen for us to look at.
I mean, I think this is really the big issue, because there's been a lot of organisations that have received billions of pounds. And there is a cost of living crisis. And now it's a case of where does that money get spent and how does that money get spent? And if you have supported someone, now it's time to give it, to be repaid, to just kind of give it back, and that trade-off isn't happening. Now, I don't know who's to blame in that, but it is such a shame that, you know, some organisations have stepped up, like this council. Now, as we're moving forward, other pressures have kind of got in the way. And I think there needs to be an honest conversation about, realistically, how do we fund the things that we rely on? Because things are hard out there. And whenever there's a recession, things like domestic violence and all of that always goes up. And if the resource isn't there, why isn't the resource there? And it's not necessarily always about where the funding's coming from. It's about how the money and where the money is being spent and how it's being spent.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want, well, firstly, I think I agree with what a lot of people have said around the priorities. I think they're still very apt. It's really heartening to see the amount of work that's been done around domestic violence and around the reduction of violence to women and girls. I think the council has done some really great work on that as well. So that's fabulous to watch that continue. I guess one of the considerations that I would say around priorities is that 2021-2022 saw quite dramatic increases in hate crimes across lots of different minority groups. So I think there was a 25% increase in Kent in violence towards people with disabilities, the LGBTQ community. There was a significant spike in violence against Asian people. So with that continuing and that pattern continuing, I don't think that we have anything at the moment that illustrates they're doing any partnership work around specifically reducing hate crimes. It would be interesting to hear from the police about what that picture looks like in Swale, because there's lots of kind of research around what it looks like at a county level and what it looks like as a UK level, which is shocking, really. But I haven't seen anywhere that kind of levels it down to kind of a Swale based the Swale numbers. In Kent, as an example, there were over 450 incidences of violence towards disabled people last year, which is just shocking, and it's, you know, quite a significant number of crimes when you're looking at other crimes that we're already kind of tracking. With with hate crimes towards people from the LGBTQ plus community, I've had reported to me recently at least a couple of incidences of homophobic abuse in Faversham, and I find that really hideous. And I think we should be kind of leading from the front in making sure that Swale isn't a place that accommodates any kind of hatred towards any minority groups. So I think that would be something that would be really positive to look at how we work with partners on that. Thank you.
I was just going to add to that, I suppose, in that hate crime is one of those crime types that we're looking at within the strategic assessment. We haven't had any data for yet, so I'll pick that up.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on what Councillor Hampshire said, things out there are really, really difficult. There's a cost of living crisis. This council didn't create that cost of living crisis. And I think we should just be mindful of that. However, we have felt the impact as an organisation of just those kind of things in terms of cuts and in terms of how we have to divvy up our budget. And so on that basis, I want to come on to the top of page 12, 85 additional incidents of shoplifting. Now, I don't know whether we've got any information, whether that's as part of the cost of living crisis has driven that up. Is it as a result of that? Is it something that we've got any tangible or empirical data on? I don't know. I then move on to page 13. At the top of that, we find following the loss of funding for the Caring Dads programme. So once again, funding lost. Then on page 5 of 10, item 1.1, on hold, still waiting update from KCC as to whether the grant for this project is still going ahead. So once again, it's dependency on others. And of course, KCC, as we all know, we're about to go bankrupt. So it's difficult times for everybody. So whilst I understand what Councillor Hampshire is saying, and certainly within the spirit of it too, it is really, really difficult. And it's literally about how we spend those pounds, shillings and pence, for those old enough to remember those things, and make it effective. Thank you.
Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Chair. I think a lot of what I would have said had already been said, but one thing I must say, it is getting very serious. I have this centre on 34 High Street, and very visible. First of all, I've had 3 occasions where we've had serious conversations with the police who have been visible. This is before Christmas and even today, with crime being on the High Street. One of the great problems at the moment with the closure of the Phoenix, some of the people who have got major health problems and were using the Phoenix as a place to pick up food and be able to communicate with others, whether like them or people who are going to help them, that closure has now affecting us, and it's getting worse day by day. Today I had 4 people contact me because of one was a homeless sleeping rough on the street, and I must be careful how I say this, but it was a person who could quite easily commit a crime because they were homeless and had no money in their pocket. It is serious, and I think this council should begin to take an interest in the High Street and what is going on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rolls. Councillor Dendor, thank you for being patient.
It's all been said, actually.
Councillor Gold.
I think the only question I had was on the issue of modern slavery. It's mentioned that was a different approach is needed. I was wondering whether there had been any thought about that. There are issues that I'm aware of where this is possibly relevant, and if there a different approach is needed, what is that approach going to be, and also about the awareness raising. I think that's something that is relatively inexpensive, but I think it's something that is very much goes under the radar, as is mentioned on the in the paragraph on this, and I think this is something that a focus is important, because those are probably some of the most vulnerable people. Thank you.
No, I agree with you on the modern slavery. I think that is something, it's hidden within supporting vulnerable people, but these are people who are suffering under the radar often, and I would hope that the police, and I have said it before, should tackle that as more of a priority. But I don't know if you've got anything to bring on that, Steph.
I think the awareness raising, the Modern Slavery Act came in I want to say 2015, and we did an awful lot of awareness raising then. And although we've done some refreshers, I think it's one of those things that people know could be going on, but maybe become more focused on sort of car washes and nail bars because they were the headlines. So I think looking at a slightly different way of communicating what it can be. There is a quite well-known site somewhere near Faversham that we are currently having a look at in terms of potential exploitation and slavery on that site. And we have come up with a slightly different project approach of how we can try and engage with those. So there'll be a bit more information that comes out on that. It is about trying to look at things differently and how we can get the messages out there for people to spot, as well as what we do about it when we think there could be a concern. So again, I think that still needs to be an ongoing priority for partnership.
Yep, Councillor Gould.
I think there's possibly some work to be done on sort of raising awareness of that amongst agencies as well, because I think it's something that's the people who come into contact with it may not even notice it, even when they're actually in contact with people who are in those situations. So I think some actually targeted work on to agencies such as Health might be something that would be worthwhile, because it's something that isn't featured in much of our training, certainly.
Right, I have two left to speak. So Councillor Eakin, followed by Councillor Saunders, who will be the last person speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Most of it has been covered, actually, but just one thing. Page 7, 3.1, obviously it mentions the focus area work in Sheerness is due to be closed due to a reduction, which does concern me quite a bit. I don't really think putting that in the report actually paints a good image. Look, so Councillor Jays, yourself and I think there was one other, Councillor McCall. We looked round a building in, it might have been September, maybe August, with local police. And if you go back now, there was a massive fire and the building was burnt to the ground. So, focusing on Queenborough is all well and good. And by all means, that's a good idea as well. But by closing everything in one area on a focus area, I just think that's the wrong image to be painted. I think it should be reconsidered.
I can feed that back.
Councillor Saunders.
Thank you. Obviously, we've been asked to kind of confirm whether we're happy with the priorities. When I look at the priority list here, under crime, if you look at the stats we've been presented with, it looks as though there's been quite big increases in almost all of these categories of crime. I'm wondering whether that is a pandemic thing, and that if we looked back at the statistics a few years, we'd see that there wasn't an increase in some of these crimes like burglary or violence against the person. So that was a first question, really, because if that's not the case, it should be. Perhaps it is the case that we should be focusing a bit more on crime, particularly in an environment where crimes are, quite likely to be increasing. The other thing I wanted to ask about was antisocial behaviour. You explained the stats, but in my experience, antisocial behaviour is something that residents, complain about a lot. And is it a case of that there's a lot of underreporting, do you think, of antisocial behaviour, and therefore we should be careful not to underestimate its impact on our communities? Thank you.
I think you're probably quite right with antisocial behaviour. I think it's one of those that over the years it ebbs and flows in terms of levels, and I think particularly in certain areas we know that quite often it is underreported. I think just getting the message out to sort of any members of the public, I know we've heard lots of times over the years about the issues with 101, but crime and ASB can be reported through an online reporting tool now, which I've heard is significantly easier. So I think maybe it is just a bit more messaging that we could try and program in around different ways to report to see if that then does have a bit of an impact. In terms of the ongoing COVID impact on crime levels, burglary again ebbs and flows, and I'm not sure that the current levels we could say probably are linked to fallout from the pandemic. And violence against the person, I think, has been increasing for many, many, many years. A lot of that is domestic abuse, which again, it's the age-old question of, is it because of increased awareness or is it because that it's genuinely going up? But I think focus will need to remain on domestic abuse and on sort of that more serious violence anyway. So I think part of the work that we're doing and actually writing the strategic assessment is trying to unpick some of those figures as far as we can, but some of it is assumptions, unfortunately.
I did say Councillor Saunders would be the last one, but I did miss Councillor Jays. So I'll come to him in a minute. I think with domestic abuse, from my experience, I used to be in the ambulance service, and I can tell you when there's a recession, it goes up. Simple as that. And I think there is probably a combination of people do report it more because they're more aware of it. But certainly when times are hard, then it does get a certainly increase in domestic violence and other such offences. Councillor Jays, very quickly.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Eakin. We need to keep a focus on Sheerness. Looking at the priorities for the CSP under ASB, I think vehicle ASB is a massive issue in my ward. There's a car overturning probably monthly for I don't know what reasons yet. The police are still investigating. Whether it's illegal, noisy bikes and cars with their illegal exhausts, people not wearing seatbelts, speeding regardless of the conditions, phone use, drug driving. I think the police need to focus more in on that because I think deaths are going up for road accidents, as we've seen from the statistics. I think it's definitely something that needs to be focusing on.
So road safety figures aren't something that we've probably looked at recently because they were reducing so significantly for such a long time. So I'll see what we can maybe get hold of to see if there, if there's anything we can corroborate that with, I guess, to see whether we can make it into any kind of focus.
Okay, thank you all for your input. I mean, the way I look at it is the CSU, the team at the CSU is doing quite a good job. What seems to be the big letdown, and maybe that's where we need to put the focus, is when you report things like drug dealing or allegedly drug dealing or antisocial behaviour, noise, there never seems to be the responses from the police. We have more important things to do. But I do accept that recently, the new Chief Constable, who's just recently been appointed, has made a commitment to community policing will be a bigger priority than it has been. So we can always watch and see. But I think feeding that back, that's the way I perceive what people are saying, that the Community Safety Partnership is doing a good job, but when they feed stuff back to the police as well, it tends to be that the police don't respond to the concerns that a lot of people raise to them. And you're quite right, there is a reduction in not just PCSOs, but civilian staff, which it's great to employ extra police, but when 30 warranted police officers are put into control, you can see that there is a problem, and the police are facing the pressures everyone's facing, that their budgets are getting tighter and tighter. hope you've got some good information for that, and thank you for your input. And I'm sure if you think of anything and anyone thinks of anything, then please feel free to feed it in. Just finished. He's just taking it all away. Is it desperate or?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, obviously, feedback to Councillor Hall and myself as well, before the 26th.
Good point. Thank you. Yep. Before the next meeting so that you can raise it, which is on the 26th of January. Thank you. So if we move on to item 6, which is open spaces and play strategy review. What I'd like people to do is to try and keep any comments, suggestions, and it related to the play areas, as the Environment Committee will be looking more in detail at the open spaces, and I believe your meeting's tomorrow night. So if we can just stick to that, that would be helpful. But if I could ask the officer to introduce a report, please.
Thank you, Chair. As has been communicated, the report sort of provides the starting of the process for considering sort of a reviewed open spaces and play area strategy for Swale. Again, as has been identified, the real focus of this committee is around the play areas, as the Environment Committee is looking particularly at the open space elements. The strategy is a key document for the council in two major focus areas. So in terms of how we manage and operate and hopefully improve open space, but also with regard to the local plan and the requirements needed for sort of future development of open space within new developments. So it provides the strategic view of how that will be developed going forward. The current open space strategy was developed in 2017 and covered the period 2018 to 22, and obviously it's been in place over that period. The report sort of provides the background to the sort of key principles, both of the open space and the play area sort of section, but in terms of the council's corporate plan, it very much sits under the investing in our environment strand, or priority 2. Members obviously have seen the open space strategy. It's included as Appendix 1, and the principles within it. And we'd obviously ask you to sort of consider what changes, if there are any additional priorities, how you would like to frame the strategy, and basically to consider the strategy and the way the play areas are cited within it, to provide us with some background as to how to take the strategy forward. In due course, there will be a sort of technical review which will consider all of the needs basis, the quality, the quantity, etc. But that will be sort of completed in due course, at which time we'll obviously sort of come back with consultation and look further at the draft of the strategy going forward. We've cited a couple of sort of questions within the report, just to prompt you perhaps towards some key questions. Sort of one is whether the council should consider to continue with removal of redundant poor quality play areas, and also sort of around the focus of the future play area refurbishment programme. So we currently use a RAG rating as described in the document. So again, is that still relevant to going forward?
Thanks, Graham. Can I just add, you'll see within it's page 24 on my document, the financial implications section, because I think it's important to focus on the fact that we've had it with the previous strategy. If we had a golden chalice, we would probably want to do all the play areas in the borough, but I want to point out that actually this needs to be framed within the budget parameters that we've got. Many of you already know that in terms of how we fund most of the play equipment is through Section 106 or financial contributions like that. We have been lucky in some years to be benefits from external funding and the like, but I think what we need to do is hopefully have members give a steer on priorities they see, but bearing in mind that we won't have an endless pot of money to support that. So it is about that prioritisation if possible. So I just wanted to just draw your attention to what's said in the financial implications as well. So thank you.
Okay, if I open up to members, Councillor Boyne and Councillor Dender next. Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations. In terms of, first one, how the plan's going to be developed, and it says it's the government you've looked at and worked on over the next few months. So a bit more information in that in terms of what do you mean by the next few months? Is it going to be before the election, post-election, anything like that? When we get into the PERDA period, will this in effect stop for that period? Hopefully it won't, because I'd like to see this progress. So just a bit on the timescales. Couple of things I would like to see go forward. In my ward, the parish council the last year, the Meadow Tennant, they refurbished their play area from a Section 106 money from a development. They put in a mugger, multi-use games area. Thank you very much. Not mugger. We've moved on to the last conversation. Hey ho. And it is brilliant. It's a place where in one area you can it's football, you can do basketball, it's a hard surface, it is multi-use, and I would love to see more of those, because from one piece of equipment you've got 5, 6 plus different types of use, and it's a good surface that's, yeah, if it's chucking down with rain, you're not going to be one out there, but it's not likely to cause you any injuries. So I think if there's a way we could actually see more of that going around, and that's will then appeal also to different demographics and particularly ages. If we focus down on play areas of just play equipment and you could put a swing in, for example, and that's going to be likely to be a certain age group that's going to be making most use of that. But with these muggers, I wish they'd come up with a better title than that. With these muggers, you can actually get it has more appeal to a much wider range of people. So I would certainly be keen for that. I am disappointed, I think, with the best of intentions, the skate park could be really good. In my opinion, I don't think it's turned out that way. I think it's big. When I visited down there, it is not a pleasant place to be. And I hear reports of some unpleasant characters and actions occurring down there. So it could be brilliant. It could be a real asset. And I think if there's something which we could do to make it that, then we probably should, if we could look to do it, because it has potential as a place for people to meet, rather than, from what I hear and have seen, cause potential difficulties and troubles. And in terms of the future plans, should we refurbish play areas? If a play area is to the point where it is obsolete, not used, as well, and so worn down that it becomes a potential health and safety risk or could cause injury to people, then absolutely they should not be removed, they should be withdrawn. And if that means, sadly, if we haven't got the money to replace it, I would much rather not have a play area than a child get injured and end up causing themselves some potentially long-term, maybe life-changing injuries. But where it is possible for it to be revamped in a cost-efficient way, because the purse is very, very tight going forward, then we should also do that. Thank you.
So just to paraphrase, what you're saying is really think about some of the equipment that's going to put into deal with a wider range, and if equipment's old and it can be refurbished in a reasonable cost and it is still functional and safe, we should keep it. Fine. There you go. Just try and keep it nice and brief. Next on the list, Councillor Dendor.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on what Councillor Bowen said, recommendation D obviously deals with the disposal of open space, which would of course include that piece of playground. But I wanted to talk about recommendations F and G on pages 21 and 22. I have some concern here. I totally understand the budgetary constraints, absolutely. We're in a real bind. Sorry, page 47, my apologies. I'm looking at the report page rather than the full page. It's page 47 and 48. These relate to areas, I mean, it relates to open spaces, but of course they may have play areas within them produced by developers as part of their development. And recommendation F concerns me because it says the council will no longer, it doesn't say will consider or not consider, it says it will no longer adopt. And then goes on to say that, it will be asked that a management company will take it over. Now, I'm sure most councillors in this room have experience with management companies. Yes. They're useless. They're absolutely and utterly useless. They do nothing. They won't look after that area. It will just degrade. Yes. So it very much concerns me that that is the state we're going to leave them in. Now, I know there's a 10-year commuted sum in this case where it will be looked after for 10 years, but after the 10 years, it will just be left to rot by the management company. That is for sure. I've dealt with so many of them and they are so bad. So that concerns me. And then moving on to G and community asset transfer, again, my scepticism, recommendation G, finding other ways or other management models for public open spaces. And again, I'm relating this to the play areas within the spaces. Sounds great. Then you go out and you try to find these volunteers that are going to take it on and look after the playground. You won't find them. You won't find them. So again, you're going to try and give this out to a group and it's just going to, again, just degrade and be ignored and end up unsafe, as somebody mentioned earlier. Those two really, I understand the budgetary constraints and I understand what's behind it, but it really does concern me that we're pushing that way so much and not taking the responsibility for these areas. Thanks.
Do you want to come back on that at all?
The two areas that you've sort of identified are within the existing strategy, and it's something that we have been sort of doing for the last 4 or 5 years in terms of not adopting open space or not agreeing to adopt open space and play areas within new development. So you will see sort of a number around the borough. I have to say that to this point, I haven't had any or seen any complaints coming in for those, apart from one that I can remember. So it's just one of those where obviously, you know, you've identified that as an issue sort of going forward, and we can further consider it. But it, yeah, at the end of the day, you're quite right. It comes down to the issue around finance and budgetary provision, and sort of the council's ability to resource that into the future. Obviously, yeah, commuted sums for 10 years is how it used to be done. However, you know, at some point you finish that 10 years and the council ends up responsible for those spaces, and that's a decision that was made 5 years ago not to adopt new open space. But obviously that's the whole point of this of this discussion, is to tease out sort of different thoughts on different elements of the strategy. So yeah, thank you.
If I could just come back quickly. Yes, I did mention the commuted sums, and of course most of the ones I'm thinking about have not yet come to the 10-year. So they've not yet come to the point where we where the responsibility, our responsibility, is removed. So that's where my thoughts are. You know, what's going to happen in some cases, another 5 years or 4 years or 6 years.
Obviously, the previous administration decided on that tract, and it's up to members now to decide whether do we adopt all play areas, or do we adopt all the roads? Will KCC adopt all the roads on Cheppy? That sort of thing, isn't it? There are double taxation issues and such forth, which is probably out the remit of this committee at the moment. So if I move on to...
Thank you, Chair. In Roman Ward, I find the play areas very adequate, and I know that in the half term and summer term, and also younger children that are using them, whether there are any problems as far as being repaired or anything like that, I wouldn't know about. But I do, on my regular walks, I do watch what is going on, and I must say I'm very happy. I don't know whether my fellow Tim would agree with me, but I must say they're great. When it comes to the excuse me, skate park, I agree with Councillor Bowen that I'm very worried about that. I've been so since I became a councillor. I think it does need a lot of attention, and there are dangerous points, and it leads to the Dolphin Barge Museum and the access to everything down there. I don't think it's managed properly by the company that have the franchise. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Gould, sorry.
Yeah, I was slightly picking up the same point that Councillor Dender was making about involvement of volunteers. Certainly in Bolton, there's quite a bit of funding raised for equipment there. And I was wondering whether that involvement of volunteers need to be something that was built into the strategy, particularly thinking about some of the gym equipment that's gone in. I think I get the impression it's not used as much as it could be, but actually for that sort of thing you need a sort of a group of people around it to actually promote the use of something like that. And out of the back of that, you could also perhaps get people who are, have an interest in the play areas, either local residents and especially when it is multiple ages as well, whether there should be something in the strategy about encouraging and developing and pointing volunteer groups to the sort of things that they could be doing to help as an active part of the strategy. Because I think if there is that ownership of a site, I think that would helps people keep an eye on it as well.
I think you're right, and I think it was Councillor Bowen who said about what I would call a friends group, and in our village we've set that up, and it's actually expanded and moved on to, rather than just looking after the recreation ground and the play area, into the woodland and wildfiring and things like that. So yes, they can be successful, but I do know that sometimes they are very hard to get going. Sorry, Graham, do you know?
Yes, I think that one of the strengths in terms of Swale has been our sort of involvement of volunteers. Milton Creek Country Park. There are sort of throughout the borough really in various places and doing various bits of involvement in various open spaces in Bloom. So there is no reason why it couldn't sort of be added to or included within the strategy. You need to try, or we would need to try to find some sort of a focus for those groups and facilitate and support those groups, which again, with some of the resource issues could be an issue going forward. But again, if that's where the priority is and an element that you want to see in the strategy, then that's for us to work out how we can achieve that. But yeah, I think it's it's something that works throughout the borough currently in various streams of our work. Thank
you. Sorry, Councillor Perkin.
Thank you. Yes, I completely agree with Councillor Gould about the having volunteers as an important strand of the plan going forward. They're incredibly helpful at Faversham Recreation Ground. I think it's worth mentioning the fact that it's pretty heartbreaking that we've had 3 quite significant fires at play areas over the last 12 months. That's obviously cost the council and the taxpayer a lot of money to have that sorted out. I wondered whether there's any merit in looking at how advice from the police on kind of designing out crime and putting that into the strategy, because I know there's lots of Faversham Town Council, as an example, has just done a crime survey with a professor from the University of Kent, and he spoke really interestingly about some of the ways that other authorities have kind of designed crime out of their open spaces, and it's not a huge amount of money that you have to spend to do that, and it obviously in the long run, if you design it out when you're putting it in, then you don't have to go back and clear it up if someone sets it on fire, which is, I mean, it's been horrible to watch. I guess the other kind of points that I've got is, along with volunteering, is there a way that we can be a bit more proactive in looking at our community spaces and community food projects? There's interesting work being done by a charity called Incredible Edible that look at opportunities for communities to grow food together in their open spaces. And then as well as that, I guess, I'm really pleased to see that the focus is still very much on making sure that the play spaces are accessible for kids with disabilities and also for parents that have disabilities as well. And I was wondering whether there is a lot of work done at pre-application stage for developers when they come forward to look at the accessibility of equipment that they put in, if they're putting equipment into their parks. I know that I've had a chat with a developer recently about looking at focus grouping that with parents to look at what they can do to improve their application for their open space. So yeah, those are my points. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. We move on. Councillor Hampshire.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of things. It's great that we have such great community spirit. I know from my own ward there is a hell of a lot of friend groups and all of that do an awful lot. But it's one thing to go and say pick up litter in a wildlife area or in a play area, to take over the responsibility of the running of play equipment because of RoSPA reports, etc. And this policy that is presented to us this evening is a policy that, for all intents and purposes, is out of date because it runs to 2022 and we are now in 2023. So it's about, where do we go going forward? And I'm not saying that you can't pass, other services, outsource it to other organisations. But I do think the checks and balances need to be there if that is what the council wants to do, and that proper legal structures are in place. Because the Friends group is unincorporated. Now, if they found out that actually they're personally liable. And when I say personally liable, their assets, so their house, is personally liable. I very much doubt that goodwill will be forthcoming. So then you have to look at other structures, and you either go down the limited company route or you go down the charitable route, which could also be incorporated. But that comes with a lot of regulation, and people are very busy. And it's, you know, do they want to deal with that? And what you do have is a great network of parish councils. And what is sad to see, that where most of the play areas are that you're looking to improve, they look to be predominantly more sort of built up urban areas and not those in the rural areas. And I suspect that's because they're owned by parish councils. Now, it's all very well saying, okay, we're going to have Section 106 agreements and all of that to deal with new play areas if we need them. Because, I mean, if you're going to build 3,000 homes, quite frankly, you can't expect the people from Bobbin to drive all the way to Grove Park, because that is probably the largest play area that would be able to handle a development of that size. It's absolutely unrealistic. Or they've got to go to maybe Newington, for example. There's probably one in Bobbin, I don't know where it is. So actually, you probably are going to need to, if the council has to deliver that volume of housing and it looks to, you know, do larger sites because it wants the infrastructure to support it, then it's going to have new sites on these developments. And the last thing I would want to do is basically set up the future residents or the children of the existing families buying a home to be lumbered with a leasehold property, because that's essentially what will happen if you're asking the developer to set up a management company. They'll all be leasehold, and they'll be able to charge whatever they like. A dog fouls on the ground, every resident in that whole development will be charged £30. So
if I just stop you there, because it's going to raised.
Well, I don't think it is. I think it's actually saying what the importance is. What I think the council needs to do is actually look at where its play areas are, whether they are owned by them or whether they are owned by other organisations. Look at where the developments are going and actually see if there is a way that the council can better get the bang for the buck that it needs to promote healthy lifestyles and that through play equipment. And it might be that you have to team up, say, with Brogdale Sick or with, Baldwin Parish Council or Robertson Parish Council or Bredgar Parish Council to actually get quality equipment in those areas. Because, the parish councils, won't necessarily have the firepower of going for the grant funding that the Borough Council has. But if you have the Section 106 as your delivery, then there really does need to be a tightening up and regular review of how that money is being spent, because the risk is it just doesn't get spent, or it doesn't get spent where it needs to go. And actually that is a disservice to the residents of Swale. So the only thing I'm saying is be careful of always outsourcing. If you are going to go down the outsourcing route, make sure it's got the legal safeguards and that there are proper surface level agreements in place. And also, don't ignore the rural communities and what the council might be able to do, because that actually might be better overall than trying to get a development with a new play equipment. Sometimes it's better to actually enhance what you've got than always put something new in.
That's a good point well made. With friends groups, I see them as being like the PTA. They will raise funds, work and look after things for the benefit of the school, but it's the school that has the say and the final management of it. But that's a debate possibly to have another day when we look at friends groups.
Chairman, if I may, that's all very well, but a school has a governing body and it will outsource to its PTA, but it doesn't look after the delivery of the national curriculum.
No, but we could have that debate all night. But Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I concur with Councillor Bowen. It's Brogdale who run the skate park, and there have been concerns. I've had meetings down there. The police have been involved in the past. I think it could do with a shake-up. I believe we had a muser, not a mugger. a multi-use sports arena rather than a multi-use games arena in Milton. But it didn't prove popular enough, and it's now going to become a tennis on its own. I guess, following on from Councillor Hampshire's point, the reason we have to pay for the repairs of the play areas in and around Cinnamon is there are no parishes or town councils, so there's no funding for them anyway. And a couple of questions. Page 35, I assume that the policy will be updated in line with the NPPF as it goes forward. And following on from Councillor Dendar, we've known that developers have the responsibility for maintaining, however they do it, their play areas and green spaces. I have raised the issue that I've spoken about in the past a number of times. How is it policed if they don't do it? Is there anything the council, any powers the council has to police this? No. Thank you, Chair.
Certainly to date, where the open space has been sort of vested in management companies, the management companies are sort of set up on the basis of legal agreements that's essentially contained within the details contained within the Section 106. So the whole setup is based around what we're asking them to do. In some of the agreements, but not all, there's an ongoing requirement for them to manage and maintain to a management plan, and that has to be renewed on a 5-yearly basis, and they do come back to the council to have that approved. However, again, from a resource perspective, that's potentially not the way we would want to do it. Usually, the management companies are set up so that the residents actually have a share in the management company. So the whole idea is that they take responsibility alongside the management company for the open space, and quite often there is a fee that's applied to for maintenance of the open spaces going forward. So that's how they generate funding to pay for the open space maintenance. So there are provisions within the Section 106 agreements for that. But there are, I think, from the discussions that I've had with legal services, there are there's limited ways that you can influence that. It's that conundrum of, do you want to own it and take full responsibility for it? And if you don't, then it's very difficult to then go back and say, well, we don't want to pay for it and we don't want responsibility for it, but we want to tell you what to do. And that doesn't really work. So there is, yeah, undoubtedly there is that conundrum to, and again, I can come back to that's why we're sitting here discussing it as to what the focus is and where you want us to go. But with the resource issue as the background, as was pointed out at the start. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, I totally agree with the charities and town councils where there are that they can obviously have a much more local interest in it. The main thing I'm concerned with is, with any of these organisations that take over things, is the insurance. And I'm talking about personal liability insurance. And yes, they could be run by charities. I think Councillor Jays will probably know that we, Minster Parish, actually were asked by a small local group at the top of Barton Hill Drive quite some years ago to help them with the funding of the equipment as a little play area where I forget what the estate's called, but it's where they're all named after parsons. So I put the Padre estate. But we actually did, you know, as a parish, we took the responsibility, and I think that's the way forward. that it certainly needs a very tight business model for whoever takes over the responsibility of it.
Okay, I was going to touch on designing out crime, but Councillor Perkin has pretty well said the things I was going to say. I think, unfortunately, I think it's clearly something we need to think about in the new strategy, whether it's the where play parks are located. I think certainly the problems in Faversham probably reflect partly that the play park is away from housing and people perhaps spotting that things are going on. But I think part of that, as other people have said, is having volunteers, having a group of friends, having partnerships. That's all pretty fundamental in preventing and discouraging crime and antisocial behaviour. So yeah, those are my 2 points, but I think other people have already really said them for me. Thank you.
So yeah, sorry to speak twice. I forgot about something. I wondered as well with the strategy whether there's any merit in looking into how we can encourage play that's not structured. So having kind of free play and natural resources. So in Faversham at the Rec, for example, they've got some really nice kind of log carvings and got just logs on the ground and big stones. And kids actually really enjoy that kind of play as well. It doesn't always have to be about having like a designated play area within the kind of open space itself. So I wondered whether we could look at that. And I know that there's been some concern raised in Faversham about the amount of rubber that's used in those kind of play areas on the ground and that kind of thing. So I wondered whether there was some more kind of work on what we can do, especially around the climate emergency, to make play space a bit more natural. Thanks.
Yes, very definitely is the answer to that one. Natural play came in to sort of the highlight probably 10 years ago, and certainly where we've been able to, we try to incorporate it in, like at Faversham Recreation Ground, there was opportunities, the space, and sort of the rest of the landscape that perhaps we could utilise to make the sort of the whole sort of much more interesting and valuable for play. So yeah, I think it's sort of very much the way forward in effect. If I may, can I also sort of come back on the fire issue? Just to, and it's quite interesting that in terms of thinking about it and what has been said tonight, that and designing out crime, fire. I've been here for 32 years, and it's only the last 2 or so years that we've had these incidents. You always get the odd, a bonfire, etc. But play has, over the last couple of years, it seems to have had these particular issues, and I think that there is something in the design. The brighter colours tend to be sort of plastic, so where we can consult and give and look at play areas in terms of design, the attractive ones are perhaps the colourful ones, which tend to be different materials. So there probably is sort of something in that in terms of how we look at and consider those elements sort of going forward. So we'll take that on board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got nobody else down to speak. I think it's very informative. I think there are decisions that some members may have to make if they want to take on all the play areas that the developers put in. Then obviously there needs to be an amount of money in the budget to cover that. And with everything else, if you put an amount in, you may have to take that from somewhere else. So there's got to be an interesting debate going forward. I think there were some very good ideas. I like the idea of the multi-sports areas. I personally feel one of the issues with some of the playgrounds that we've got is they're made really designed for primary school children, and older people or older children or young adults, whatever, however you refer to them, sometimes miss out. And I don't know if they get frustrated and they feel there's nothing to do, but if they had activities they could do, then that might make difference. So there's lots of things, but I hope, Graham, you've been able to take some good stuff back. And I'm sure if members have got anything, they can always feed it back in as well. Right, sorry, I couldn't, yep. So I'm just going to let Martin Cassell have the last say. Sorry?
That's what I was going to say. He may well tell you. Yeah, no, I'll come back.
Okay, and I'll just offer it to Martin Cassell. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Graham. I think he's answered the majority of the questions in there. There was one question that I think was pertinent as you were wrapping it up, and it was something Councillor Bowen asked right at the start, which was around timescales. The technical assessment and the audit hasn't been commissioned yet, and so in answer to Councillor Bowen's question, it's very unlikely the work will absolutely continue from after tonight and tomorrow night's discussions on it, but it's very unlikely that it will come back to councillors pre-elections. So that audit is quite a lengthy process. So hopefully that answered the question. The next steps after that will be bringing back that technical assessment and then looking at consultation on sort of the key findings from that and the conversations that you've had tonight. So just wanted to come in on those next steps there. Thanks, Chair.
Say again, over.
I'll do it. For expediation and translating you, Martin, because we didn't hear you very well, but basically he was coming in on the timescales. So the work will continue through pre-election period. We haven't commissioned the technical assessment yet, but we'll do. That work will be, I think, people that it's quite technical, and there's certain processes that we have to follow because of Sport England and various other organisations. That work will on go, and then the technical assessment and the priorities and the draft consultation will come back, but that will be after the election. I imagine it. Yeah, it's going to at least 6 months. Yeah. So remember. But yeah, that's what Martin said. Thank you, Martin. Over and out.
Okay. So if we move on to the last area, which is item 7, the forward plan. So you can see what we've been discussing the evening. And that's about it for the forward plan. You've got the 3 items there: the tennis court improvement project, playing pitch strategy, and a parking review. And where's that? Oh yeah, built facility strategy. Sorry. So with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you all.